The rain had been falling for hours, the kind that drummed steadily against windows and soaked the streets, until they glistened under the dim glow of flickering streetlights. It was almost midnight in the small southern town of Brooksville, and most residents had long since gone to bed, leaving the streets eerily quiet except for the faint hum of a lone police cruiser idling near the station. "Officer." Daniel Hayes leaned back in the driver's seat, his hand wrapped loosely around a lukewarm cup of coffee. At 32, Hayes was known as one of the more patient and level-headed officers on the force. He'd seen his share of domestic disputes, petty thefts, and the occasional bar fight. But Brooksville wasn't exactly a place where big cases happened often. The radio crackled to life, shattering the calm. "Unit 4, we've got a possible break-in at 1125 Cedar Lane. Caller is an elderly male. REPORTS. Hearing movement inside his home. No one else on the property." Hayes straightened immediately. Cedar Lane, he knew that address. Everyone did. Belonged to Sergeant Leonard Len Carter, an 82-year-old black veteran who'd lived alone for the past 15 years. Len was something of a local legend, decorated for his service in Vietnam. A man who had once commanded troops in hostile territory, but now spent his days tending to a small vegetable garden and tinkering with old radios in his garage. In Brooksville, folks respected Len. He wasn't the type to panic over nothing, so if he was calling 911 in the middle of the night, something was wrong. Hayes grabbed the mic. "Copy that. Unit for responding." As he drove through the rain-slicked streets, Hayes's mind wandered. He had met Len a handful of times once, when the man came to the station to donate blankets for the homeless shelter, and another when Hayes helped him fix a flat tire on his old Ford pickup. Len was quiet, dignified, and carried himself with the kind of unshakable presence that only came from a life of service and sacrifice. When Hayes turned onto Cedar Lane, he slowed his cruiser. The houses here were spaced far apart, each sitting on large, tree-lined lots. The branches swayed heavily in the wind, casting restless shadows across the road. Len's house came into view, a modest, single-story home with a wide front porch. One of the porch lights was flickering, and the front gate hung open, creaking with each gust of wind. Hayes parked a few houses down, killed the lights, and stepped out. The rain hit his jacket in cold, heavy drops. As he approached, he noticed something unsettling. Len's front door was slightly ajar. "Sergeant Carter." "Brooksville PD," Hayes called out, his voice firm but respectful. From inside, a shaky voice answered, "Back here." In the kitchen, Hayes entered cautiously, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. The house smelled faintly of coffee and old books. But there was also something else, a metallic tense in the air that made his instincts bristle. He found Len in the kitchen, standing beside the counter with a baseball bat in hand. His eyes were alert, but there was an unease in them that Hayes had never seen before. "They're still here," Len whispered. "I heard them in the back room. Footsteps, moving around. But there's more to it, Officer Hayes. Something's not right." Hayes scanned the room. Nothing looked out of place, at least. Not yet. "Stay here, sir. I'll check it out." Len caught his arm before he could leave. "No, son. You don't understand. I locked that back room years ago. Nobody goes in there, not even me." Hayes felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What's in the room, Sergeant?" Len hesitated, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Something I should have told someone about a long time ago." Before Hayes could respond, a sudden noise echoed from down the hall, a slow, deliberate creak. Like the sound of someone stepping on an old wooden floorboard, Hayes drew his weapon. "Stay behind me." They moved toward the hallway, the old floor groaning beneath their feet. The sound came again, this time accompanied by something far stranger, faint scraping noise, like metal dragging across wood. When Hayes reached the locked door at the end of the hall, he saw it. The knob was turning. From the inside, the metallic click of the doorknob echoed in the narrow hallway, each faint rotation tightening the knot in Officer Hayes's stomach. The air felt colder here, as if the very walls held on to a draft no heater could chase away. "Len." Carter gripped his baseball bat tighter, the veins in his hands standing out beneath weathered skin. His eyes, though clouded with age, locked on the door with a mixture of dread and defiance. "Who's in there?" Hayes barked, his voice sharp and commanding. No answer, only the creak of the knob followed by a sudden, dead stillness. Hayes motioned for Len to step back, then positioned himself at an angle to the doorway. Rain pounded the roof above, masking any subtle noises from inside. With one smooth motion, he reached for the doorknob, finding it cold to the touch. Unnaturally cold, as if the room beyond hadn't been touched by warmth in decades. The lock gave way with surprising ease. The door creaked open an inch, revealing nothing but a sliver of darkness. Hayes flicked on his flashlight and pushed the door wider. The beam cut into a room frozen in time. Dust motes drifted lazily in the stale air, illuminated like tiny sparks. Against one wall stood an old wooden desk covered in yellowed papers and a rotary phone. Shelves sagged under the weight of books, their spines cracked and titles barely legible. But it wasn't the furniture that made Hayes's heart rate spike. It was the smell. That same metallic temps he'd noticed in the kitchen was stronger. Here, almost suffocating. Len stood at the threshold, unwilling to step inside. "This room, it belonged to my brother," he said quietly. "Never came back from the war. I kept it locked. Couldn't bear to change anything." Hayes's flashlight swept across the floor and froze. There, near the center of the room, were wet footprints. Fresh. Barefoot. The water from them was still glistening in the light. Forming small, uneven puddles on the dusty wood, Hayes turned sharply. "Sergeant, did you?" But Len shook his head violently. "I haven't set foot in here in over 40 years. A sudden clang erupted from the far corner of the room, where a tall wardrobe stood. The sound was sharp, metallic-like. Something. Dropping to the floor inside, Hayes stepped closer, weapon raised, his flashlight's beam trembling slightly as adrenaline coursed through him. "Brooksville PD. Come out slowly with your hands where I can see them." No one emerged. Hayes grabbed the wardrobe handle and yanked the door open. Inside were neatly hung uniforms, still smelling faintly of mothballs. On the floor, however, was something completely out of place, a small, dented metal box. The lid was partially open, revealing what looked like old photographs, medals, and stacks of letters tied together with twine. And then Hayes saw it tucked. Beneath the letters was a small, blood-stained rag, fresh enough to still be damp. His gaze darted to Len, who was now visibly shaking. "That wasn't here before," the old veteran whispered, before Hayes could process what that meant. The sound of footsteps erupted behind them, then the hallway they'd just come from, slow, heavy, deliberate. Hayes spun around, gun up, flashlight aimed at the source of the sound. The beam of Hayes's flashlight cut through the dim hallway, catching dust swirling in the air like restless ghosts. The footsteps had stopped the instant he turned, leaving behind a silence so heavy it seemed to press against his ears. Len was still in the doorway of the old room, gripping the baseball bat, his knuckles white. "Someone's in the house, officer," he said, voice trembling, but sure. "I know what I heard." Hayes's instincts screamed at him to move fast. He stepped into the hallway, scanning left and right, his gun held steady. On the wooden floorboards, forming a thin trail that seemed to lead toward the back of the house. "Stay here," Hayes ordered. Len's jaw tightened. "Not a chance. I've fought in jungles with bullets flying past my head. You think I'm letting you walk into trouble alone?" Hayes didn't argue. He knew veterans like Len Wentz. They made up their mind. There was no changing it. The two moved together, their footsteps muffled by the worn rugs in the corridor. At the end of the hallway was the back door, slightly ajar, the night wind pushing it open just enough to let in the cold. Hayes reached it first. Stepping onto the small porch, his flashlight swept across the backyard rows of overgrown bushes. A sagging shed, and beyond that, the dark outline of the woods. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked, just as Hayes was about to step down into the yard. A loud crash came from inside the shed. He and Len exchanged a look. The shed was about 30 feet away, its padlock hanging uselessly from one hinge. Hayes motioned for Len to stay behind him, then approached slowly, each step deliberate. The smell hit him before he reached the door, a sharp mix of damp wood, rust, and something else. Something foul. Hayes gripped the handle and flung the door open. Inside, the beam of his flashlight caught the glint of metal tools hanging on the wall. An overturned bucket, and in the far corner, a large tarp-covered shape. The tarp shifted. "Police. Show me your hands," Hayes commanded, stepping forward. The tarp slid off slowly, revealing not a person, but a battered old trunk. The lid was ajar, and from inside, Hayes could see more. Of the same twine-tied letters and military memorabilia from the locked room. But there was something else, something that made his stomach drop. A small, leather-bound notebook, its cover warped from age, lay on top. And on that cover, in faded ink, was a single word: confession. Hayes reached for it, but before his fingers could close around the book, the sound of shattering glass erupted from the house. Len's voice bellowed from the porch, "Officer, someone's inside again." Hayes sprinted back toward the house, heart pounding. The front window was smashed, the curtain fluttering in the wind. On the floor beneath it, a trail of muddy footprints led deeper inside. Whoever had been here wasn't running away, they were still in the house. Hayes didn't waste a second. He stepped back into the hallway, gun up, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. The smashed glass crackled under his boots as he scanned each doorway. The trail of muddy footprints was clear now, visible, bare, and leading toward the living room. Len, still holding his baseball bat, came up behind him. "You see them?" "Not yet," Hayes muttered, every muscle tense. "But they're still here." The living room was dim, lit only by the flicker of the faulty porch light bleeding through the curtains. A chair had been knocked over, and a picture frame lay shattered on the floor. Hayes's eyes swept the room empty. Then he heard it, a slow, deliberate inhale. Coming from the hallway closet, Hayes signaled to Len to stay put, then approached the narrow door, his flashlight steady. The breathing grew louder, more ragged. Whoever was in there wasn't trying to hide it. They wanted him to know they were. There, with one swift motion, Hayes flung the door open and aimed his light inside. For a split second, the beam caught the figure of a man, tall, thin, his face obscured by a shadowy hood. His eyes glinted in the light. It was cold and unblinking. The man lunged. Hayes barely had time to react, sidestepping as the intruder shoved past him and bolted toward the kitchen. Len swung the bat, narrowly missing the man's head. The intruder didn't stop. He was fast, moving with an agility that belied his thin frame. "Stop, police," Hayes shouted, giving chase. The man darted into the locked backroom hallway, then disappeared into the very room they'd just searched. By the time Hayes entered, the man was gone, but the open window on the far wall told him how. Rain blew in through the opening, soaking the dusty floor. Hayes scanned the room quickly. The wardrobe door was open again. The metal box was gone. Len stepped in, panting. He took something. "Yeah," Hayes said grimly, "and I'm betting it wasn't just old war letters." Len's eyes darkened. "There's more to this than I told you, Officer Hayes." Hayes turned to face him. "Then you'd better start talking, because whoever that was, he's not done with you." Len hesitated, then sighed heavily, as though releasing a secret he'd kept buried for decades. "That room. It's not just my brother's. It's where I hid something I brought back from Vietnam. And if that man has it, God help us all." Len moved to the kitchen table and pulled out a chair, his bat now resting against the wall. Shoulders were slumped, but his eyes carried the weight of a man who'd seen more than most could. Bear. Hayes stood opposite him, gun still in hand, dripping rainwater onto the floor. "You said you brought something back from Vietnam," Hayes prompted. "What is it? Drugs? Weapons?" Len let out a humorless laugh. "If it were that simple, I'd have handed it over decades ago." He glanced toward the dark hallway as though making sure no one else could hear. "Back in '68, my unit was stationed in Quang Tro Province. Jungle so thick you could disappear 5 feet in. We were sent to clear out a series of tunnels the Viet Cong had been using. Thought we'd find ammunition. maybe a few prisoners. Instead, we found a room deep underground. No one could explain how it got there. It wasn't like the rest of the tunnels. It was older. Much older. Hayes frowned. Older. Like how? The walls were stone, not dirt. Carvings all over them. Symbols I'd never seen before. None of us could read. In the center of the room was a small metal box, about the size of a lunch pail. No lock, just sitting there. My commanding officer wanted to leave it, said it didn't belong to us. But then, Len's voice dropped. Lower we heard something inside it, like scratching. Hayes's eyes narrowed. An animal. That's what we thought. But when I opened it, Len stopped, swallowing hard. Inside was a bundle of papers and something wrapped in cloth. I didn't know what it was then, but the moment I touched it, I felt cold, deep down, like it was leaching the heat. Out of me, my CO ordered me to seal it back up. But when our unit got ambushed the next day, I was the only one who survived. That box was still in my pack. He rubbed his temples. I brought it home, told myself it was just a souvenir. But strange things started happening. Friends I showed it to got sick. Some had accidents. I locked it away in that room and swore I'd never touch it again. Hayes thought about the intruder, and now someone else wants it. Len nodded grimly. I don't know how they found out, but if they have that box, they'll open it. And if they do, he trailed off, staring out the rain-speckled window, we might not be able to stop what comes next. Before Hayes could ask more, a voice echoed from the porch low, gravelly and unfamiliar. Sergeant Carter, we need to talk before things get worse. Hayes and Len exchanged a look. Neither of them had called for backup. Asterisk. The rain had eased to a fine mist, and the flickering porch light cast an eerie, stuttering glow on the figure standing outside. Hayes moved first, signaling Len to stay back. He approached the front door with his gun raised, every nerve on edge. The man stepped forward, revealing a face etched with deep lines and shadowed eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. His hair was silver, cropped short in the style of a military man who never fully left the service. He wore a heavy trench coat, the collar pulled up against the damp air. Put the gun down, officer, the man said calmly, his voice steady. Despite the tension, if I wanted you dead, I'd have made my move before knocking. Hayes didn't lower the weapon. Name. The stranger hesitated just long enough to make Hayes's grip tighten. Colonel James Rourke, retired. Same unit as Carter back in '68. Len's voice came from behind Hayes, low and hoarse. James, I thought you were dead. The colonel smirked faintly. Almost, but not quite. Hayes glanced between the two men. If you know each other, maybe you can explain why someone just broke in here and stole something out of Carter's locked room. Rourke stepped into the doorway, dripping rain onto the mat. His eyes scanned the interior like a man assessing. A battlefield, then. I'm too late. They have it. Len's expression hardened. You know who they are? I know exactly who they are, Rourke said grimly. And if they've taken the box, we have less than 48 hours before it's opened. Hayes folded his arms. And what happens when it's opened? Rourke looked him dead in the eye. You don't want to know, son. But since we're standing here, I'll tell you anyway, because once it's open, people will start dying, and it won't stop. The silence in the room was suffocating. Rourke moved further inside, closing the door behind him. The box isn't just some war trophy. It's older than the war, older than this country. I've spent the last 50 years trying to keep it out of the wrong hands. The men who took it tonight aren't burglars. They're part of a group that's been hunting it for generations. Hayes tried to process this. What's in it? The colonel's eyes darkened. A map. And not just any map. Shows the location of something buried long before any of us were born. Something powerful enough to start wars. Called it Project Harbinger. The locals back in Vietnam. They called it the mouth of the earth. Len gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles pale. James, you told me you destroyed all the other leads. I did, Rourke replied. Except one. Yours. And now they've got it. Hayes stepped forward. Then we find them. Tonight. Rourke shook his head. You don't find them. They find you, and when they do, you'd better be ready. At that moment, the sound of a car engine idling outside broke the silence. 3 sets of headlights glared through the rain-soaked window. "They're here," Rourke said simply. The low growl of engines vibrated through the damp night air. Hayes moved to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peek outside. Through the misty rain, 3 black SUVs sat idling in the road, their headlights cutting hard beams across the lawn. The vehicles looked out of place on quiet Cedar Lane, windows tinted so dark they were mirrors to the streetlights, one by one. The engines clicked off. The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. "They're not neighbors dropping by for coffee," Hayes muttered. "No," Rourke said flatly. "They're here for the veteran." And the officer who saw too much stepped forward. "Then they'll have to go through us." His voice was calm, but Hayes could see the tension in the old man's shoulders. The SUV doors opened in unison. Figures emerged, 6 men in total, all wearing dark clothing and tactical vests, their faces hidden behind balaclavas. Even from a distance, Hayes could tell they moved like professionals, shoulders squared, rifles slung across their chests. Rourke was already moving. "We've got maybe 30 seconds before they breach. We hold them off, then we move." "You've got a back way out?" Len shook his head. "Not without crossing the yard. They'd have us pinned before we made it to the trees." Hayes pulled his service weapon, checked the chamber. "Then we make this house very unfriendly to visitors." Rourke tossed him a small pouch from his coat. Inside were 2 smoke grenades, dented but functional. "Vietnam surplus," he said with a grim smile. "Figured they might come in handy." The first thud hit the front door, testing. Not forcing yet. The sound echoed through the house, a warning of what was coming. "Positions," Rourke ordered. We moved to the side of the door with a shotgun that seemed far too heavy for a man. His age? Len crouched behind the couch, baseball bat in one hand, an old revolver in the other. Hayes took the far corner of the room, his angle covering both the front and side windows. Another thud, this one harder. "Brooksville PD. Ice," shouted through the door. "This is private property. Stand down." No response, just a third bone-rattling slam. The door frame groaned in protest. Then it happened fast. The side windows shattered inward, shards of glass spraying across the living room. A man in black tried to climb through, his rifle leading the way. Hayes fired once, the shot slamming into the wall inches from the intruder's head. The man dropped back with a curse, disappearing into the rain. At the same moment, the front door exploded inward. The hinges tore loose, and 3 armed men stormed inside. Rourke didn't hesitate. His shotgun roared, the blast deafening in the confined space. One intruder went down hard, clutching his shoulder. The others fanned out, their boots pounding. Against the hardwood floor, Len stepped into their path like a man half his age, swinging the bat with a crack that sent another rifle clattering to the floor. Hayes squeezed off 2 more shots. Forcing the remaining man to dive for cover, smoke filled the room as Rourke popped one of the grenades. The thick, acrid cloud billowed outward, blinding the intruders and giving the defenders precious seconds. "This way," Rourke barked, grabbing Len's arm and pulling him toward the back hall. Hayes covered them, his heart hammering in his chest. Through the haze, he caught a glimpse of something chilling. One of the masked men wasn't firing wildly. Looking straight at Hayes, smiling. The smoke was thick, clinging to the lungs and burning the eyes. Hayes kept low, his training kicking in as he moved backward toward the hall. Every creak of the floorboard, every shadow in the haze was a potential threat. But then there he was. Through the swirling gray, one figure moved differently from the rest. The others stumbled, coughing, their vision obscured. This man walked slow, steady, deliberate. His rifle hung loosely at his side, his head tilted as though studying Hayes like a specimen under glass. "You've been busy tonight, officer," the man said, his voice muffled through the balaclava. "I've heard your name already." Gritted his teeth. "Funny, I haven't heard yours." "Right." The man stepped closer. He was taller than Hayes by a good few inches, his presence filling the narrow space. Then, in one slow, unsettling motion, he reached up and pulled the mask from His face, Hayes froze. The man's features were sharp, high cheekbones, deep-set eyes that burned with a calculated intensity. His skin was weathered, but not with age. It was a kind of where that came from, years in hostile places. And across his jaw ran a deep, jagged scar, one that looked like it had been carved there by something not entirely human. Rourke's voice came from behind Hayes, low and heavy. "No, it can't be," the man smirked. "Oh, it can, Colonel, and it is." Len pushed forward, coughing through the smoke, his revolver trembling in his grip. His eyes widened as they locked onto the intruder. Walker. The name hit the air like a gunshot. Hayes glanced back at Len. "You know him?" Len's face had gone pale. "He was with us in Guangzhou, but he died. We saw it." Walker chuckled, the sound dry and humorless. "That's the problem with you old soldiers. You think death is so permanent?" Rourke's jaw tightened. "We buried you, Walker. Carried your tags out myself." Walker took another step closer, his voice dropping. "It what you thought was me. The truth is, I stayed behind. And I found what we missed that day. The box you stole, Carter, was only half the story. I've spent 50 years looking for the rest, and now, thanks to you, I have it." Len's grip tightened on his revolver. "You don't know what you're messing with." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm messing with," Walker said, smiling faintly. "And when I'm done, the world will finally see what's been buried. For centuries, I won't stop. And neither will they." He tilted his head toward the door, where the silhouettes of more armed men were beginning to emerge through the haze. "Next time we meet," Walker said, backing away into the smoke, "there won't be walls to protect you." And just like that, he was gone, vanishing into the chaos outside. Rourke grabbed Hayes' shoulder. "We need to move now, before he circles back." Hayes nodded, his mind already racing. This wasn't just about a stolen box anymore. This was about a man who'd come back from the dead, carrying secrets that could burn the world down. Hayes didn't wait for another knock on the door. "Move now," he barked, guiding Len toward the back of the house. Rourke was already ahead, moving with the speed of a man who'd done this 100 times before. They burst through the kitchen into the mudroom, the night air cutting sharp against their skin. Rain slicked the wooden steps as they descended into the backyard, their shadows long and fractured in the spill of light from the burning porch lamp. Behind them, the front of the house erupted in noise, boots on floorboards, furniture crashing. Walker's men were tearing the place apart. "This way," Rourke ordered, cutting across the overgrown yard to the tree line. Hayes covered their flank, scanning the darkness for movement. Len's breathing was heavy, but his grip on the revolver never loosened. "Where are we even going?" "Somewhere Walker won't follow," Rourke replied without looking back. "At least, not right away." They pushed through dripping undergrowth, branches clawing at their clothes. The rain was heavier here, the canopy unable to block the downpour entirely. Hayes could hear more engines starting in the distance, not from the house, but deeper in the neighborhood. Walker had reinforcements. Double time. Within minutes, they reached a gravel path barely wide enough for a single vehicle. Parked at the end was an old military jeep, its paint faded, tires caked with mud. Rourke swung into the driver's seat like it was still 1969, and the engine roared to life. "Get in." Hayes shoved Len into the back, then jumped into the passenger seat. The jeep lurched forward, fishtailing on the wet gravel before catching traction. They tore through the trees, the beam of the headlights bouncing wildly across the road. Only when the roar of pursuit faded behind them did Hayes finally exhale. "All right, Colonel. You gonna tell me where the hell we're going?" Rourke's eyes were fixed ahead. "Safe house. Old contact from my days in recon. Off-grid. If Walker knows about it, well, then we're already dead." The storm followed them all the way to a squat, weather-beaten cabin nestled in a hollow between two ridges. No lights, no visible power. Lines, just a dark outline against the rain-slick forest. Inside, the air was stale, but dry. A wood stove sat cold in the corner, and an old radio lay in pieces on the table. Rourke locked the door behind them, then moved to the table and pulled out a folded oilskin packet from his coat. "This," he said, laying it flat, "is the rest of the story." He opened it to reveal a tattered map, but not just a geographic one. Strange symbols ringed the edges, and the land masses didn't match any modern atlas. The ink had faded to brown, but the lines were still clear enough to trace. Len stared at it for a long moment. "God help us. You kept it." Rourke's gaze was hard. Someone had to. Project Harbinger wasn't just about finding a relic. It was about finding the coordinates to a site older than recorded history. Whatever's buried there, it's the reason men like Walker will kill without hesitation. Hayes leaned over the table. "And you think this thing is real?" Rourke met his eyes. "Son, I've seen it. If Walker gets there first, we won't be talking about stolen artifacts. We'll be talking about mass graves." Outside, through the thin cabin walls, came the faint but unmistakable crunch of tires on wet gravel. Hayes's head snapped toward the window. We were followed. The rain outside had slowed to a mist, but the air felt heavier, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Hayes crouched by the window, the faint reflection of his own tense face staring back at him. Trees, two beams of light sliced the darkness, headlights moving slow. "Deliberate. They know exactly where we are," Hayes whispered. Rourke didn't look up from loading his shotgun. "Or they're hoping we think that." Len's knuckles were white on the grip of his revolver. "You two can play word games later. I say we hit them before they get close." Hayes shook his head. "Don't know how many there are." Headlights stopped just short of the clearing. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out, tall, lean, wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. The way he moved was wrong for one of Walker's soldiers. No tactical stiffness, no squad formation. Just a slow, measured walk toward the cabin. Rourke's grip on the shotgun eased, just barely. "No, it can't be." The figure stopped. At the porch steps, then spoke in a voice roughened by years of whiskey and wind. "Colonel Rourke, you look older." The hat tipped back, revealing a lined face with eyes like winter steel. Rourke actually laughed, short, bitter. "Mason, I thought you were dead." Mason shrugged. "That makes two of us." Hayes frowned. "Friend of yours?" Rourke didn't answer, which was answer enough. Mason stepped into the cabin without waiting for an invitation, dripping rainwater onto the wooden floor. He set a leather satchel on the table, unbuckled it, and pulled out a heavy oil-wrapped bundle. "This belongs to you," Mason said, sliding it toward Rourke. When Rourke unwrapped it, Hayes's breath caught. It was an identical map to the one Rourke had shown earlier, but with twice as many symbols, and what looked like coded annotations scrawled in the margins. Lenz's voice was barely a whisper. "You kept your half?" Mason smirked. "Course I did. I've been watching Walker chase shadows for decades while I held the real coordinates." Hayes felt a sharp pang of unease. "If you've had this all along, why show up now?" Mason's expression hardened. "'Cause Walker just found the first marker. You've got maybe 3 days before he's standing on the site. After that, nothing on this earth will be able to stop him." Before Hayes could reply, the sound came soft at first, then swelling into a roar. Multiple engines, fast, cutting through the wet night. Mason's eyes flicked toward the door. "They're not here for tea." Rourke was already moving to his post by the window. Hayes chambered around. Len's jaw was set like stone. Outside, dark figures began to emerge from the tree line. Mason pulled a compact submachine gun from his coat, his voice cold. "All right, boys. Let's make this hurt." The first shot cracked the silence like a whip. Hayes dropped to the floor instinctively as a round punched through the cabin wall, splinters exploding into the air. "Contact north tree line." Rourke barked. Mason moved like a predator, already in position by the door. Submachine gun, coughing short, precise bursts. 2 shadowy figures went down in the mud before they even reached cover. Len took position at the back window, revolver steady. "Got movement south." Hayes crawled to the window beside Rourke, sighting down his rifle. The dark figures were closing fast, too fast. Whoever Walker had sent, they weren't just mercenaries. These men moved like trained operators. Then, A voice crackled to life over the cabin's old field radio static, close but unmistakably calm. Officer Hayes. I was wondering when we'd get to speak. Hayes froze. Walker. On the other end. Walker chuckled softly. You've made quite the mess tonight. You should know my patience for interference is very limited. Hayes kept his voice low, his rifle tracking a shadow near the ridge. You're going to have to get in line. I've got plenty of people who don't like me. That's different, Walker replied. They want to kill you. I don't. I want to recruit you. Rourke's eyes flicked toward Hayes sharply, but Hayes ignored him. Not interested. Think carefully, Walker said, his voice suddenly colder. You've seen Carter's map? You've heard the stories? But you haven't seen what's inside the site? I have. Once I open it, there won't be police or armies or governments, just those who stand with me, those who don't stand at all. Hayes was about to fire back when Mason's voice cut through the tension. RPG. Through the window, Hayes saw the telltale flash. He barely had time to shout before the rocket slammed into the side of the cabin. The world became a roar of fire and splintered wood. Hayes hit the floor hard, his ears ringing. Ow. Rourke was already dragging Len toward the back door, Mason laying down covering fire. The cabin was coming apart, the roof timbers groaning under the shockwave. The radio crackled one last time, Walker's voice now almost playful. 3 days, officer. That's all you get. Tick-tock. And then the signal went dead. Mason grabbed Hayes by the collar. We move now, or we don't move at all. They plunged into the rain-soaked forest as the safe house collapsed behind them, flames licking at the night sky. The first shot cracked the silence like a whip. Hayes dropped to the floor instinctively as a round punched through the cabin wall, splinters exploding into the air. Contact north tree line. Rourke barked. Mason moved like a predator already. In position by the door, his submachine gun, coughing short, precise bursts. 2 shadowy figures went down in the mud before they even reached cover. Len took position at the back window, revolver steady. Got movement south? Hayes crawled to the window beside Rourke, sighting down his rifle. The dark figures were closing fast to fast. Whoever Walker had sent, they weren't just mercenaries. These men moved like trained operators. Then, a voice crackled to life over the cabin's old field radio static, laced but unmistakably calm. Officer Hayes. I was wondering when we'd get to speak. Hayes froze. Walker. On the other end, Walker chuckled softly. You've made quite the mess tonight. You should know my patience for interference is very limited. His rifle tracking a shadow near the ridge. You're going to have to get in line. I've got plenty of people who don't like me. That's different, Walker replied. They want to kill you. I don't. I want to recruit you. Rourke's eyes flicked toward Hayes sharply, but Hayes ignored him, not interested. Think carefully, Walker said, his voice suddenly colder. You've seen Carter's map? You've heard the stories. But you haven't seen what's inside the site? I have. And once I open it, there won't be police or armies or governments, just those who stand with me, those who don't stand at all. Hayes was about to fire back when Mason's voice cut through the tension. RPG. Through the window, Hayes saw the telltale flash. He barely had time to shout before the rocket slammed into the side of the cabin. The world became a roar of fire and splintered wood. Hayes hit the floor hard, his ears ringing. Was already dragging Len toward the back door, Mason laying down covering fire. The cabin was coming apart. The roof timbers groaning under the shockwave. The radio crackled one last time, Walker's voice now almost playful. 3 days, officer. That's all you get. Tick-tock. And then the signal went dead. Mason grabbed Hayes by the collar. We move now, or we don't move at all. They plunged into the rain-soaked forest as the safe house collapsed behind them, flames licking at the night sky.